Detective Dean Harlan's office was a sanctuary of quiet ghosts. They lived in the overflowing filing cabinets, in the stacks of cold case folders that slumped on his shelves. And most of all, they lived on the sprawling corkboard that dominated one wall. At its very center, held fast by a single yellowed thumbtack, was a school picture of Emily Forrester. It was slightly faded, the colors muted by a decade of unforgiving fluorescent light, but the image remained piercingly clear. A little girl of 8, with a gap-toothed smile that promised mischief, and a halo of golden curls that suggested innocence. For 12 years, that smiling face had been a silent, constant reproach. The Forrester case was more than just a cold file in a locked cabinet. It was a personal failure, a brand seared into Harlan's professional soul. It was the ghost that walked the quiet corridors of the Cedarbrook Hollow Police Department, a story told to rookies to remind them that not all monsters are caught and not all children come home. He'd been a younger, more optimistic detective back then. 32, with a new badge, a sharp suit, and the earnest conviction of a man who still trusted in the fundamental order of things. He'd looked a frantic, shattered Laura Forrester in the eye and promised her, with an arrogance born of inexperience, that they would find her daughter. But the days had bled into weeks, the weeks into years, and the trail had evaporated into the misty, indifferent Pacific Northwest air. It left behind nothing but a grieving mother, a town that had lost a piece of its innocence, and a detective who had learned the hard lesson of humility. At 44, Harlan was now the grizzled veteran. The optimism had been worn down like a stone in a river, smoothed over by years of seeing the worst of human nature. It was replaced by a dogged, weary persistence that was less about hope and more about duty. He'd never officially closed Emily's case. Every year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, October 14th, he would perform his grim ritual. He would unlock the cabinet, pull the thick, dog-eared file, and spread the contents across his desk. He'd reread the witness statements with their vague descriptions of a nondescript van. He'd re-examine the map of the search grid, a spiderweb of futility. And he would stare at that photo, the silence in the room pressing in on him, and ask the ghost the same question. What did we miss? The call came in on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. It was from dispatch, the voice of the young operator, Chloe, unusually tense, a construction crew foreman over on Oak Ridge Road. They were renovating an old garage on an Airbnb property, breaking up the concrete floor. They'd found something that didn't belong. Harlan's posture straightened, a reflexive tightening of muscles, long accustomed to disappointment. "What kind of something, Chloe?" he asked, his voice sharp, cutting through the low hum of the station. There was a hesitant pause. "A kid's bike, detective, pink. The foreman said it's buried deep." A cold, familiar current went through him, a jolt of adrenaline and dread he hadn't felt in years. It was the feeling of a dormant nerve suddenly coming alive. He grabbed his worn leather jacket from the back of his chair. "Seal the scene!" he commanded, his voice a low growl. "Tell the foreman not to let anyone touch a damn thing. I'm on my way." His hand hovered over the phone. The next call, a delicate and dangerous necessity. Laura Forrester. He knew this would either be the beginning of the end of her 12-year nightmare, or a new, uniquely cruel chapter of it. There was no gentle way to do this. He chose his words carefully, his tone professional, but softened at the edges, asking to see her in person. He needed to gauge her reaction, to have her identify the item before the media circus inevitably descended and ripped the wound open for public consumption. He met her at her house, a small, meticulously kept craftsman on the other side of town. He hadn't visited in years, but remembered every detail with perfect clarity. The wind chimes on the porch, the rose bushes that bordered the walkway, the slightly faded welcome mat. Laura herself looked older, of course. The vibrant, frantic energy he remembered from those first terrible weeks was gone, replaced by a quiet, fragile strength. The grief was still there, a permanent resident etched into the fine lines around her eyes, but it was overlaid with a kind of resolute endurance that he deeply admired. She had survived the unsurvivable. He didn't take her inside. The porch felt safer, more neutral. He told her there, watching her face intently as the words landed one by one. "We're renovating a property." The crew found something buried under a concrete floor. It's a child's bicycle. He saw the sequence of emotions play out across her features like a storm front moving in. Shock, a shield of disbelief, then the encroaching terror. And then beneath it all, a flicker of something he hadn't seen in her eyes in over a decade. Hope. It was a dangerous, volatile thing, a flickering candle in a gale. His job, he knew, was to manage it, to shield it, to keep it from consuming her, if this lad turned into another dead end. "Oak Ridge Road?" she asked, her voice thin. "Which house?" He told her the address. Her hand flew to her mouth, a gasp catching in her throat. I drive past that house every day on my way to work at the library," she whispered, her eyes wide with a dawning, sickening realization. Every single day. The scene at the Airbnb property was a swarm of controlled chaos. Uniformed officers manned the yellow tape, their faces grim. The forensic van was parked at a discreet angle. Harland felt a grim sense of irony. For 12 years, Laura Forrester had passed within yards of a secret that could unlock her daughter's fate. The proximity was a special kind of torture. The garage was his focus. It was detached from the main house, a modern structure with cedar siding. Inside, the air was thick with the dust of pulverized concrete. The renovation foreman, a burly man named Johnson, with chalk-white powder on his boots, pointed to a jagged hole in the floor. "It was deep, Detective. 3, maybe 4 feet down. We had to use the big jackhammer. This wasn't an accident. Someone put it there and poured the concrete right over it." Harlan knelt at the edge of the pit. He didn't need to be a forensics expert to see the truth in the foreman's words. This was deliberate. A burial. A tomb. He led Laura to the edge, one hand gently on her elbow, ready to support her. He watched her face as she looked down at the mangled, dirt-caked pink bicycle, its frame twisted and its tires long since rotted away. Her sharp, ragged intake of breath was all the confirmation he needed. "That's hers," she whispered, her voice a thread of sound in the dusty air. She pointed a trembling finger toward the handlebars. "The streamers. They're faded, but she loved them. She picked them out herself. Rainbow-colored." The identification was positive. This was their first tangible piece of evidence in 12 years. The concrete tomb had given up its first secret. Now the real, painstaking work began. His team, a well-oiled machine of familiar faces, started the methodical process of dismantling the history of the house. Ownership records, construction permits, rental agreements. The property was owned by a man named Vance Holloway, a wealthy software developer who had moved to Zurich, Switzerland, 6 years ago. The house had been built in 2010, a year before Emily's disappearance. Holloway had lived in it for a couple of years before turning it into a high-end Airbnb rental, managed by a local caretaker. The caretaker's name was Ernest Mallory. A quick DMV check showed a man in his late 50s, clean record, living on the outskirts of town. Harland sent a patrol car to pick him up for a voluntary interview. While he waited, his forensics team, led by his sharpest tech, Maria Chen, began the painstaking process of extracting the bicycle. "No telling what we'll find, Dean," Chen said, her face illuminated by the harsh work light she'd set up over the pit. 12 years under concrete and alkaline soil. DNA or prints would be a miracle. "I'll take a miracle, Maria," he'd replied, his gaze fixed on the mangled pink frame. "But I'll settle for a single fiber that doesn't belong, a tool mark, anything." Ernest Mallory arrived, escorted by 2 uniformed officers. He was a stooped, nervous man, with a thin frame and watery, shifty eyes that refused to meet Harlan's. He played the part of the bewildered employee to perfection, wringing his pale, bony hands and professing total, flustered ignorance. "A bicycle? Under the concrete," he stammered, his voice reedy. "I can't imagine. I just look after the guests, mow the lawn, change the sheets. Mr. Holloway is very particular. I don't know anything about that." Harlan let him talk, observing him from his desk back at the station. He applied gentle, steady pressure. He explained that access was key. The list of people who could have been on that property during or shortly after its construction was short. The owner, the construction crew, and anyone who had lived there or had access. Mallory was quick to deflect, his eyes darting around the interview room. "It must have been done during construction, before the floor was even poured." "That makes the most sense. I wasn't even working for Mr. Holloway then. Not officially." It was a plausible theory, a convenient one, but Harlan didn't like the way Mallory's eyes kept darting toward the evidence bag on the table containing a clod of dirt from the site, a flicker of something more than just nervousness in their depths. It looked like fear, pure, undiluted fear. He let Mallory go, for now, with a stern warning not to leave town. He tasked his best detective, a young, hungry officer named Simmons, with 2 immediate priorities. Get in touch with Vance Holloway in Switzerland through the proper channels, and compile a complete list of every guest who had ever stayed at the property. It was a monumental task, a digital excavation that would take days, maybe weeks. As the first media vans began to arrive on Oak Ridge, their satellite dishes aimed at the sky like predatory insects, Harlan had an officer escort Laura home. He watched her go, her shoulders squared, her face a mask of fragile, terrifying hope. He felt a renewed, crushing sense of responsibility. He couldn't let this lead crumble into nothing. He owed her more than that. He owed that little girl on his corkboard. That night, the case took a bizarre and sinister turn. Just after 10 p.m., his phone rang. It was Laura, her voice shaking, not with grief, but with rage and horror. "He found me," she said, her voice tight. He knows." "Laura, slow down. Who found you?" I posted about the bicycle on a closed online support forum for parents of missing children. I had to tell someone who understood, and I got a private message." Harlan's blood ran cold. "What did it say?" "It was vile, Dean. It was a picture of Emily, her school picture, but it was photoshopped. Her head was replaced with a pig's head, and there was a video attached, a clip of someone butchering an animal, and a message." Her voice broke. It said, "Your daughter's as dead as this pig. Just accept it and live with it." This was a direct, vicious attack. It was either a cruel, opportunistic troll, piggybacking on the nascent news reports, or it was the perpetrator, panicked by the discovery of the bike and trying to terrorize Laura into silence. "Our tech team is on it now," he assured her, though he knew tracing a newly created anonymous account through layers of VPNs was a long shot. He had her forward the message. He noted a small, almost insignificant detail. The trees in the background of the butchering video looked European, possibly alpine firs. It pointed, almost too neatly, toward the owner in Zurich. A calculated misdirection or a brazen, arrogant taunt? The complexity of the case had just deepened exponentially. The following hours were a flurry of caffeine-fueled activity. The forensics report on the bike came back, as expected, with no usable prints or DNA. The concrete and moisture had done their corrosive work. The list of Airbnb guests was a logistical nightmare, spanning a decade and hundreds of names from all over the world. The international call with Vance Holloway, coordinated through a bleary-eyed Interpol liaison, was frustratingly inconclusive. Holloway was shocked, cooperative, and adamantly denied any knowledge. He offered full access to his records. Ernest Mallory has been my caretaker for about 10 years, Holloway explained, his voice tinny over the speakerphone. But he did do some odd jobs for me before that, during the final stages of construction, landscaping, final cleanup, that sort of thing. He was recommended by the contractor. A crucial detail. Mallory had lied. He was there. Harlan was burning the midnight oil, staring at the growing incident board in his office. It was now a chaotic collage of maps, photos, and names, connected by a red string. He was tracing the timeline of the house's construction against the date of Emily's disappearance, when the call came in just after 4 a.m. It was Laura Forrester again, her voice a hushed, urgent whisper. "He's here, Detective. Ernest Mallory. At the Airbnb house. I saw a light in the garage." Harlan was instantly alert, the exhaustion vanishing in a fresh surge of adrenaline. "Laura, where are you?" "I couldn't sleep. I was going to work early, to the library, to organize the archives. I saw the light and turned down the road. He's in a white van, parked by the trees." "That property is a sealed crime scene," Harlan said, his voice hard as flint. "He has no authorization to be there. I'm sending units. Do not approach him, Laura. Do you understand?" He listened as she described Mallory's flimsy excuse when she'd confronted him from her car window, something about retrieving insurance papers for the owner. It was a lie, and a bad one. He ordered her again to leave the area, but a few minutes later she called back, her voice breathless. She had followed him. Every professional instinct in Harlan's body screamed in protest. A civilian witness inserting herself into a live situation was a recipe for disaster. But he heard the steel in her voice. She was no longer just a grieving mother. She was a hunter. He made a split-second decision. He couldn't stop her, but he could use her. "Stay on the line, Laura," he commanded, his own unmarked car already roaring to life, as he sped out of the station parking lot. "Be my eyes. Tell me everything." He coordinated the response from his vehicle, one hand on the wheel, the other pressing the phone to his ear. He listened to Laura's breathless updates, her whispers painting a vivid, terrifying picture. Ernest had stopped in a dark patch of woods off a service road. She saw the flicker of a small, contained fire. He was burning something. Now he was on the move again, heading away from the main road to his own home on a secluded cul-de-sac called Whispering Pines Lane. Harlan redirected his officers, instructing them to approach with silent, deadly purpose, lights and sirens off. Laura's next report was even more bizarre, her voice laced with confusion. "He has a fire trolley, Detective. A little red one, like the ones movers use. He's loading heavy things from a shed behind his house into the van. They're long and heavy." The pieces were clicking together in Harlan's mind, forming a picture of such horrifying clarity that it made his stomach clench. Mallory wasn't just the caretaker. He wasn't just a nervous man caught in a police investigation. He was the key. He was destroying evidence from the original crime. And now, he was moving something else. Something he'd kept hidden for 12 years. "He's leaving, Detective!" Laura's whisper was sharp with panic. "He's getting in the van! He's pulling out!" Our units are almost there, Harlan said, pushing his own car faster, the tires squealing around a turn. They will intercept. Stay back, Laura. Let us handle it now. The takedown was textbook. 2 patrol cars materialized from the darkness, forming a V-shaped blockade on the narrow forest road, trapping Mallory's white van in their converging headlights. Harlan arrived moments later to see Ernest being pulled from the vehicle. His face, a mask of slack-jawed, utter defeat. He walked to the back of the van, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He felt the weight of 12 years settle on his shoulders. This was it, the end of the line. He signaled for his officers to open the doors. The sight that greeted them was something no amount of training could prepare him for. 3 large black body bags lay inside. For one sickening, bottomless heartbeat, Harlan felt the cold hand of failure grip him. He had been too late all this time, and he was too late. But then one of the bags moved, a small, distinct twitch. "They're alive!" an officer shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief. "We have movement! All 3 of them!" He saw Laura approaching from her car, her face a canvas of dawning horror as she saw the bags. He moved to intercept her, to brace her for the shock. The first bag was unzipped by a paramedic who had just arrived. And there she was, Emily Forrester. Not the 8-year-old from the photograph, but a pale, thin, unconscious young woman of 20, with the same halo of golden hair, matted and dull. But she was breathing. She was alive. The scene transformed instantly from a criminal takedown to a medical emergency. The ambulance arrived, its red and blue lights, washing the dark forest in an ethereal, strobing glow. As paramedics worked frantically, loading the 3 sedated but living victims onto stretchers, Harlan watched Ernest Mallory. The man's defeat had curdled into a venomous, sputtering rage. His eyes found Laura's. "You should have accepted it!" he screamed, his voice cracking, spittle flying from his lips as officers shoved him into a squad car. "Just live with it. I gave them a good life. A better life. The words from the message. Just accept it and live with it." The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place with a horrifying, resonant click. It was him. It had always been him. At the hospital, the full, monstrous scope of Ernest Mallory's crimes began to unfold. The other 2 victims were quickly identified. Kayla Bennett, missing for 10 years from a town 50 miles away, and Juliana Ramirez, who vanished 14 years ago from another state entirely. 3 stolen girls. A search of Mallory's home on Whispering Pines Lane revealed the true horror. A converted storm bunker beneath his shed. A soundproofed underground prison. Inside were 3 small furnished rooms, a shared bathroom, and a common area with books and old board games. He had raised them in a fantasy world of his own creation, telling them their parents were dead, that a chemical war raged outside, and that he was their sole protector. His meticulously kept journals were a chilling testament to his delusion, a meticulous record of his twisted family. He believed he was rescuing them from what he deemed neglectful parents. Emily had been playing alone in her front yard, Kayla at a public park. In his sick, warped mind, he was a savior. But the most recent entries revealed a darker turn. As the girls grew into young women, they became more difficult to control, their questions more pointed, their compliance fraying at the edges. His fantasy was collapsing, so he had made a new, desperate plan. He had connected with an international human trafficking ring on the dark web. The fire in the woods was him burning his journals. The things on the trolley were his captives. He was preparing to sell them. The discovery of the bicycle had forced his hand. The renovation of the garage, ordered by the unsuspecting owner in Zurich, had unearthed his 12-year-old secret. Panicked, he had tried to intimidate Laura into silence with the horrific message. When that failed, he accelerated his plan to move his captives, to deliver them to the traffickers ahead of schedule. "If you hadn't gone to work early, Laura," Harlan told her later in the stark, quiet hospital corridor, his voice heavy with the weight of the near miss. "If you hadn't seen that light and trusted your instincts, he would have succeeded. They would have been gone forever." He stood back, watching, as Laura sat by her daughter's bed, holding her hand. Emily was awake now, groggy and disoriented but lucid, her mind miraculously clear, despite the years of trauma and brainwashing. She was a survivor. They all were. Harlan walked out of the hospital and back to his car as the first rays of dawn broke over Cedarbrook Hollow. He felt the bone-deep exhaustion of a 36-hour shift, but it was overlaid with something else, something he hadn't felt in years. He drove back to his office, the quiet streets still sleeping. He walked to the corkboard and looked at the smiling, gap-toothed girl. The ghost of Emily Forrester had finally been laid to rest. In its place was a living, breathing young woman, and a case that was no longer cold, but blazing hot. Justice would be served. Ernest Mallory would spend the rest of his life in a concrete tomb of his own making. With a sense of finality that was almost physical, he reached out and gently pulled the thumbtack from the board. He slid the faded photograph into a new, clean evidence bag, to be filed away, not as a mystery, but as a recovery. For the first time in 12 years, Detective Dean Harlan looked at the sunrise and felt not the weight of failure, but the clean, sharp, and deeply satisfying light of a promise kept.